3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. This episode is the True Crime Panel. I'm going to have everyone introduce themselves from left to right. Start with Jason.
My name is Jason White. I am a homicide detective for the city of Tulsa, where I've been a homicide detective for about 14 and a half years. I've been a cop overall for 25 years. That has also included being a crisis negotiator for about 10 and a half. And I worked in a lot of other assignments while being on the department, and that's me in a nutshell.
My name's Leslie Ghiglieri. I'm a true crime author. I spent about 12 years in law enforcement, started in 911 center in California and moved to Oregon, worked there in the sheriff's department, and then was offered a job working, doing computer hardware and software for different law enforcement agencies, and did retire. And after that, I worked as a CASA, which is a court-appointed advocate for children that are lost in the judicial system.
I'm Dr. Martinez. I've worked about now 19 years in corrections mostly. I am a licensed psychologist in the state of Florida, and I have dealt with inmates of all different custody levels from minimum all the way through maximum and death row. And now I've been dealing with some federal inmates and U.S. Marshal inmates, and basically prior to that, I was a neuropsychologist, and that's where I started before I landed in forensics. And I've actually very much loved forensics and sticking with it.
Transition from prison to federal. So now everyone you speak to is innocent.
Correct.
That's right. They got the wrong guy. So this episode, we're discussing Staircase, Michael Peterson. And I got to tell you, out of all the cases that we've looked at and the ones I look to in the future, there is endless material surrounding this case. This case is insanity. I was saying in pre-podcast, there's not a writer in Hollywood that can conjure this story up. This is crazy. So, because there's so much information, well, let's start with the origin because it's a very well-known thing that his wife, Kathleen, allegedly fell down the stairs and hit her head 7 times on the way down. And yeah, so she passed away. But when you look into the beginning of this guy, he's married to a woman named Patricia. They're friends with this George and Elizabeth Ratliff. They hang out, they dine together. Some mysterious circumstances surround. George dies of a heart attack in 1983, and the night that Elizabeth passes, she's hanging out with Mike and his wife Patty, and she mysteriously falls down the stairs and has very similar injuries. It was concluded accidental at the time, but then I guess with the opening of the newer case, they revisited it, and yes, the shenanigans begin. And how he was able to adopt her children, beyond me. I'm at loss for words for that. So let's open up with this. I'm gonna start with Leslie, because Leslie, you're the author here. You're the writer. Can you sit down and make a fiction story about this if you tried your best?
Well, they tried to make a fiction story out of the documentary, which was originally supposed to be a documentary about the American judicial system. It ended up being a documentary trying to prove that he was innocent. There are so many characters that I had to make a spreadsheet to keep everybody straight. And like you, I couldn't imagine how he would end up adopting the children, even though they were next door neighbors of the woman who died falling down the stairs and her husband who died of a heart attack. It's all just a kind of a hodgepodge of children and him, and trying to sort through all that and his history is really daunting. So it would make for a long book.
Yeah, this would be a 20-season series. It's insanity. I mean, there's a woman that knew them well out there, Amy Beth Berner, and this guy has allegedly told her he was in the CIA and he's murdered someone in Vietnam, and that if he wanted someone clipped, it's a phone call away. And I want to say that's shenanigans, but when you examine the behavior of this guy through the documentary, and then you watch a lot of his interviews that are, separate from the documentary, he's a tough read, man. He's Sandy, what do you read on this guy? What does his behavior speak to you?
Oh, he's really good about reading people. You can definitely tell that he's not impulsive. So he's very calculated. You can tell that he very measures his responses and everything, but he definitely reads the room well. And based off of, and it's more than anything, nonverbal feedback that he's getting. He's really in tune with that. And you can tell he kind of shifts and adjusts his response based off of that. I think he has narcissism to him, but I think he has learned to come across as being modest. So he disguises it a lot. He just is really in control of his emotions. And someone who's like that, even when he was going through so many things, he didn't really lose his cool like that. You would think that if you're fighting for your life, you'd go through like up and down, stress, and you're going to get irritable and you're going to get frustrated. And at some point, you would really show some sort of emotions, but it seemed to exercise some of the emotions that he had, that he expressed. So, yeah, he's a hard read because he's one of those people that is very deceiving, and he's good about unarming, disarms you by the way he is. He's kind of light and funny, you know what I mean? And, kind of easygoing, doesn't ever want to be too like pushy. So, but because of that, I would say he would be like that perfect person to be able to get away with anything because he disarms you. You least expect it.
I would agree with that, because one thing I notice about him in interviews, on the documentary, everything I see him in, he maintains consistent eye contact when you're giving him information. He defaults to humor in serious moments. In very serious moments, he allows himself to appear vulnerable, but then again defaults back to some form of like what I would call gross humor. And everyone around him seems to accept it, which tells me he's a con artist. 100%. Like I'm trying to figure out again. He convinced the people, agencies, to let him adopt two young girls. The idea now, his wife Kathleen, she's very successful. She's an executive. I don't see how this woman decides to marry. She agreed to marry this man, with this, knowing that he has two adopted children. Two other children, his two boys, and I don't know. It's just so bizarre. Like, he has to be a con artist. At the very minimum, he's a sociopath. Has to be. Because I really wanted to pull for him when I first started watching this. I really wanted to believe in him. Like, oh, they really screwed this guy, man. Damn it. But the more I hear about him, the stranger it gets. It's such a strange case, and that's why I tell people, and we're doing this episode for this podcast, this is not going to be a flowing, easy conversation. There's a lot of horse shit here. I mean, it's crazy, So let's start let's go to Kathleen, his wife. She is found dead at this scene. She fell down some stairs. The first thing I did when I watched the series and when I got to that part is I paused to see the scenery of the home, and nothing disturbed. To my eye anyway. So I'm going to go to Jason. You're approaching this scene. What are your thoughts, given what you know and what you're training there in mix?
Well, as far as the scene at the house, and we're talking about Kathleen, we're talking about the situation with Kathleen. Of course, you're going to want to get him away from that scene and get him away from that. You're not going to allow him to wash his hands or change his clothes. We're gonna take those items and collect those at another location, likely. And we're going to start talking to him, and we're going to ask him what happened. And that's, we're going to. I don't know how they went about doing this. I don't know if they're going to take him and they're going to read him his rights or not. If they don't read him his rights, he's certainly free to leave. I would assume that that's probably the route that they took in this particular case. They're going to probably look at it as if it was an accident from this. I mean, they're going to look at it. Here's how we do it. You look at it as if it's a murder, and then you can go down. It's easier to go down than to ramp up to a murder investigation. So they're probably already suspicious to some extent. When you look at the copious amount of blood that's there at the scene, that is a tremendous amount of blood, etc. And then you're just going to take him back to the station and you're going to try to find out what in the heck happened. And while that's going on, then the people that are the crime scene detectives are going to collect evidence, and they're going to do all of that stuff that's necessary for a particular case like this, because you have one shot at that. And you want to make sure that you do that accurate. You want to make sure that you're complete. You take your time and you do you do what you're supposed to do at these crime scenes. And so that's where we're at. I mean, to me, everybody's different. You have to you want to be open-minded. I don't want to see what the hope is here in this particular case. And I'm probably going to blow some of your guys' minds in my opinion on this case, but, I really try to look at each one of these cases with an open mind and not try to narrow in too close and say, oh, this guy's had to have done it. I mean, and you're going to have to look at all the evidence. And one of the things that stands out, and I don't want to really jump the gun here, but the thing that jumps out to me in this particular case is there's a few items of evidence that they found when they got there. And that's, to start off with, there's some blood droplets belonging to Kathleen Zellner belonging to Kathleen Peterson, rather. There's some blood droplets that were outside of the residence, and they were located on the pavement outside. So there's some talk about what may have happened that's came up recently. Well, we'll talk about that later, but there's some blood out there. And then there's a big, large blood smear that's located on the wall leading into the staircase. So that's interesting. And then you look at all of the blood that is at the base of the staircase. The thing that has always jumped out to me that is really, really missing, and that is the cast off. And if you're going to strike somebody 7 times, or actually you're going to have cast off patterns that are going to be located in this particular case, you would think if somebody's wielding something, and I don't know, I know they were saying the blow poke, which has been debunked, but if somebody's wielding something and they're striking somebody violently with an object, then you're going to have cast off. And what is cast off? Cast off is going to be the blood that ends up touching that object, and then it's going to be flung up towards the ceiling. I mean, most people aren't striking somebody sideways like this. That's ridiculous. They're going to be wielding it, and they're going to be hitting in a downward motion, thus bringing it back up, and they're going to have cast off. And I don't see any cast off anywhere in that staircase, other than you see an area at the base of that. And listen, he's got a superb defense attorney. He's a defense attorney that if I was in big trouble and if I could afford him, David Rudolph is an exceptional attorney.
Very much
so. I'm sure that, and his investigator I thought was, pretty good at his job as well. So I'm sure that they talked about that. I'm sure that they talked about the absence of any I know he did, actually. And so, that's something that really stands out to me. And I'm sure we're going to dive into this really deep, but that's just my first impression, things that I would immediately look at being the detective, because the detectives, they should show up on these scenes and take a walk through and check out what they're seeing. The other thing that I'm interested in really is the fact that between him and his wife, the thing that really stands out to me is that they didn't have a history of fighting,
Right.
Or arguing at all. I mean, they seem to have a very loving relationship. If you were to look at anything in this situation that on the very early stages of this investigation that's going to stand out, it's the fact that they were having some financial issues. And because of that, you know, people do crazy things for money. That's been going on since the beginning of humanity. So, and in this particular case, here we are again, and that's certainly something that is going to stand out in this case, as maybe that's one of the reasons. I've went on probably way too long, but that's just my initial take here, and that's some good things to at least look at as we enter this crime scene and we start interviewing Michael Peterson.
Agreed. I'll tell you what. Here's something that wasn't really mentioned in the documentaries or any other anything I could find at all. Is he's got a high IQ. This is an intelligent man. This is not he's by no means an idiot. Other than the fact that perhaps he used the same style of murder twice, and I think because it was abroad, he was hoping it'd be overlooked. Maybe that would be the psychology that, you know, keep in mind, 80s, 90s, there was no social media. And, you know, when you moved to another state back in the day, you could pretty much have a start over. You can't do that now. You know what I mean? There's a digital footprint. And I dismissed the blow poke almost immediately. I dismissed that as being a weapon because for the very thing that Jason said, they didn't notice blood on the ceilings or the walls surrounding in what I call droplet quantity, because there would be. I watch enough of these shows to have an understanding of that. However, if you look at the first woman, just to add that this first woman's not his wife. We'll get to that later. I want to figure out the motive for that, but it's very likely that, yes, they did not fight. They didn't have any kind of marital issues that were known anyway, but she's an executive. They're having financial issues, and typically an executive, when they're having financial issues, they typically hire like a forensic accountant to kind of narrow down what is going on, or an accountant at all. And, you know, the night before she perishes, they discovered Michael's deleting major files from his computers, probably hiding the idea that he's got some extramarital interest out there, whether she knew or not. But it's, to me, he could push her down the stairs, go down the stairs to her side, and just slam her head into the steps over and over again. There's consistency with the wounds from the first woman to the second one. So perhaps the murder object is the stairs themselves, and he's just slamming her head on it over. I mean, it's possible. This is just, I'm not saying it's what happened. It's just what I kind of think. This is a pretty smart guy. Then he calls 911. He's moaning and to explain away the blood on his hands. Now, if he's slamming her head into the stairwell to terminate her, to finish her off, the blood on his hands are very easily explained as I came to her aid. I didn't hear that anywhere in the documentary. That's what I thought about, because when they were discussing the blow poke at one point, I don't know if you guys remember, his physical and his face, the way he behaved, nothing altered. He didn't seem afraid of that blow poke whatsoever. That didn't seem to disturb him whatsoever. He had no reaction to it. It's when later they were running around the ideas of how she would have died. You could see a little discomfort. So I came to the conclusion he pushed her down the stairs, and then he went down there and finished her off manually. So I mean, that's one thought. So I mean, Sandy, when watching the documentary, when they're discussing scenarios and they're discussing outcomes, are you seeing a lot of change in his physical behavior and his just overall behavior? Oh, we lost Sandy. She'll be back. Jason, I'll have you take that. You notice like any flags for you when they're discussing the things that may or may not have been used?
I'll tell you. Well, she's back. I don't want to jump in on.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
No, go ahead. Finish Jason. Well, and I'll jump in after.
All right. I'll say this real quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you my thoughts that, number one, I don't know if he did it or not. I can honestly sit here in front of you today and I'm kind of giving you my answer that we normally cover at the very end. Maybe somebody will convince me otherwise in this as we sit in here talking.
Right.
I really can't tell you whether or not this guy did it or not. I'm leaning towards he didn't, but and that's going to be probably the minority opinion here. And the reason why is I really didn't get any red flags about his demeanor, and he is a very charismatic individual. He is intelligent. But like I said, once again, I just don't see that pattern of violence in this guy's life. Did he tell a couple of fibs in his life? You know what? I can't remember. The normal human being tells lies all the time. So, but they're not getting held under the light and being questioned about a murder either. So,
right.
All these things, people lie all the time. So I just didn't see that he seemed genuinely upset. He has seemed pretty upset throughout. His kids are going to be a great source of information in reference to really the deep, dark secrets and how their relationship really is inside of the family. He just doesn't strike me as a violent human being.
Sure.
And the other thing about him is that when you're going to strike somebody 7 times to the head like that in a violent way, I think it would be incredibly difficult for you not to cause any kind of skull fractures whatsoever, especially on a female that she's in her 40s. Her bones are not going to be near as strong as they would be as if she's younger. She's going to be a little bit more fragile than somebody younger, I think. That's just kind of a guess. I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm guessing that would be the case. Right. And I think that for you not to cause any kind of skull fractures with violently striking somebody about the head, thus causing some massive, massive lacerations to her head, I just that right there, I think, is incredibly difficult to explain.
Right.
I'm not saying it can't ever happen. I'm just saying it's difficult to explain. So to go back to just his demeanor, etc. I don't know. I mean, this is the thing that happened in Germany. I mean, I know we're going to get into that more. That didn't raise any eyebrows whatsoever back in the day. And quite frankly, if you think about that particular case, what would have been the motive of it? I mean,
right.
There's not a money motive. There's the money's not a motive. He, as a matter of fact, I think he was married to his wife at the time.
Patricia, 100%. So let me give you the context of what I'm thinking. He's not a serial murderer by any means. And you know as well as anyone, anyone's capable of murder given the circumstances, right? So it seems to me that when heated moments happen, like this first woman, so yes, he's married to Patty. What was he doing in this woman's, because he was observed by several people leaving her home by himself. He was observed leaving her home. Now, what's motive for killing her? I don't know. Maybe they had an affair and she was going to come out to his wife. And he's like, well, that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? Down the stairs you go. And, and again, I dismissed the blowpoke and any other blunt object long into the very beginning of this whole thing. Because, for exactly what you said early on, there was no cast. A detective and a forensics team, they're going to see that. They're going to recognize it straight away. So, yeah, I don't know the circumstance or the motive, but I'm good. And I'm not going to suggest that there is a motive for killing the first woman. But if you take the time to study why she died and the way she died, and, it's very likely that he probably had a small affair with her. And this is me, again, this isn't what happened. This is my train of thought. What would be his motive? Sure, he had an affair. She was going to go to his wife. She fell on the stairs, and same kind of method. He could just slam her head in the back of the thing and it looked like a stairway impact. With Kathleen, they're in a financial issue. And when you read more into it and you look further into it, she was trying to determine what the problem of the financial situation was and how to fix it, which leads me to believe that she was going to eventually somehow stumble into his computer, find some of his extramarital mishaps. And he perhaps didn't want a divorce. The children are at stake because he does care about his kids. We see that. That's genuine. There's no doubt in my mind. So maybe the solution in the heat of the moment, he pushed her down the stairs and revisited an old method. Because it's the irony of those two people dying the same way. Like, I don't know. It's like the guy on YouTube that got struck by lightning, got up. You ever seen this video? The guy gets struck by lightning, gets up, walks 4 or 5 feet, gets struck again. That shit never happens. That's so rare. So Sandy, his behavior when people are presenting evidence, did you notice any variations or differences in his behavior? Because I really couldn't.
No, 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 I really didn't. He's very intellectual, and with somebody like that, usually they have a very good insight and judgment into themselves, right? And I think because of his, sexual orientation that comes out into that, where, he's gay and everything, I think he has learned to hide who he really is for years.
Right.
That's not something that he came to try to hide when he got married with Kathleen. No. I mean, that has been his entire life.
Yeah.
Where he is good about playing whatever role he needs to play to get through it. And at some point, sometimes you actually start believing into it. At one point he said that he had told Kathleen, but then he also, you can tell he clearly lies. And like you said, Jason, we all lie. Sure. But if I'm married and I find out that my husband is actually having an affair with a guy, yeah, that probably really wouldn't sit with me, you know what I mean? And maybe he feared, you can tell he cares about his image, especially with the kids. So if maybe he felt that relationship with the kids was threatened by the exposure,
right?
I don't know. But, to what extent anybody goes. And sometimes, we say we would never do that because maybe our threshold for tolerating certain things is higher, but not everyone has the same high threshold. So for him, it may have been lower. You don't know. Is it possible that he killed for those motives? Yeah, I've seen less than that.
Yeah. And his tone, he goes up quite a couple. He goes up an octave or two when he seems to be backed against a wall. I did notice that because he has a good baseline for his voice through a lot of things. When you hear him speaking about family and speaking about friends and revisiting nostalgic thoughts, his baseline's pretty there. It's when something affects him in any way, shape, or form, whether it be presented with evidence, whether it be a mishap with his family, that he goes up an octave. There's some nerves. He's visually dismissive. One observation of him I made, when he is not under any sort of threat. So in other words, when they were presenting things for the case that they were going to present against him, he was detached. His eyes were going elsewhere, almost like he didn't give a shit. It's when they were presenting information that seemed like it could be damaging to him is where he was extremely engaged. He did not break eye contact. I believe they call that, what do they call it? Visual tracking? Pretty sure they call that visual tracking. So, Leslie, you and your thoughts, because you tend to lean a different direction.
Well, I'm with Sandy on this on her second round of talking about him. In the first round, when she was talking about him, I didn't quite agree with her. But I think he's spent his whole life portraying who he wants people to see him as. I thought the guy was phony, very narcissistic, very much about how people saw him. Even in both the reenactment of the family scenario and the documentary, I thought there were things about his relationship with his kids that weren't all just what a wonderful dad he was, just preferential treatment and kind of how his kids were behaving and how that affected him. I think as far as the lying, I sort of agree with Jason that, yeah, everybody lies, but it's a whole different level when you're lying about, your military service just so you can get more votes to be mayor. I mean, just from the get-go, he was lying about important things that you would think would come out in his life. Like, you can't exactly lie about things like that without somebody unearthing it, I would think. And I wondered, maybe I got this wrong, but I thought there was some comment about Kathleen maybe being strangled. There was something about compression on her throat in some regard, and wondered if that wasn't actually the way she died. And then there was damage from the fall down the stairs. And it would be interesting to know if there were any crime scene photos from the first fall down the staircase and how similar those were. I know they did the autopsy, which I found kind of odd that they would have exhumed the prior woman and then brought her all the way back to the United States and had the same ME examine her. I don't know, Jason can maybe speak if he thinks that would be standard procedure, but if you're trying to get kind of an independent outcome as far as how similar they were, wouldn't you want two different people to examine the bodies? But I didn't like him. I think maybe as happy as they might have seemed, or no reports of major fights and unhappiness, that I think when Kathleen came across those materials, I think she was very angry, and I think they both really liked the affluent lifestyle, and I think that was cause, from his point of view, whatever her life insurance was, and whatever she was threatening to do once she came across those photos. So, I didn't like the guy. Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, separate personal feelings, because I don't like him either. I think he's a phony. But let's look at into. So there's a couple things. There was a video I watched from years ago. There was a killer in Louisiana that was arrested, and he was, alligator tears, and you believe, like, when I first watched the video, believably, like, this guy's like, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, and he's crying, and they left the room, and they still had the audio on in the room, not the video, and the guy's from crying and being concerned about being falsely imprisoned, blah blah blah. You hear him giggling, and he's talking to himself. He's like, "Ha," like that. And then there's a time I'm talking to Detective Cloyd Steiger, Detective Michael Sisitsky, and they're discussing one of the other serial killers they apprehended. This guy was, he was happy to see him. Like, they'd bring him burgers to talk to him, because they're obviously trying to get more bodies, and that was the leverage he was using. Is, I'll give you more bodies, give me some good treatment, et cetera, et cetera. And he seemed like pretty overall happy. He's laughing, joking with him. And they bring up one of the girls that got away from him, and the tone of the guy went from, "Hey guys," to, "Oh yeah, I remember." Like, you could see a complete shift in personality instantaneously. He went from being one person to another person in a flash of a second. Scary shit. Like, even when you watch Ted Bundy, when they interview him, charismatic, laughing, giggling, and then when he's on the stand. Or when he's sitting in a courtroom and they're discussing some of his victims, you can see a nostalgic kind of look come across his face. And then somebody condemned him. And I swear to you, if you watch the video, slow it down, you can see his demeanor alter. So some people live with multiple people. They just, they hide it well. So let's move from that real quick. So we're going to revisit the guilt of this guy later on. Where I do have some sympathy for Michael, when they arrest him, clearly the news media at the time where he was getting roasted. And I have right here the piece of paper. It's funny to me when I look at it, in parentheses and written in huge letters, is, once again, Nancy Grace. He was, so the trial, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin with that. This is the first time that I think the guy, my personal feelings, I feel like if he didn't do it directly, he had maybe witnessed it and didn't do anything immediately to help. You know what I mean? But I think he's guilty somewhere. But at the same time, you now have a group of people working for the prosecution that are they're corrupt. there's corruption on both ends, in my opinion. This is what makes his case both unique and strange. Dwayne Deaver, 34 cases where he was tampering with evidence, leading to the conviction of Greg Taylor, 17 years in prison. So then you got the jury. I made observations to the jury. Another big bold print here for me saying this jury they have conviction written on their face. You know what I mean? So I don't even know where to go with this. It's both sides of the aisle are just bad business. So Jason, due to trial, due to court stuff, what are your feelings on this?
Well, I think that first you just have to meticulously go through what the evidence is and interpret the evidence and see with what you have. I'm I'm probably one of those people that kind of leans towards the side of caution before just kind of, I don't want to stick somebody in jail unless I know that they did this. I think that in this particular case, they had a lot of pressure from people to do something, and a lot of people have accused him to making a rushed judgment. I'm not going to necessarily go to that, but it is one of those situations where you have a lot of media pressure, probably. Once again, I'm still going at the evidence that we have at the scene, and I'm seeing that there's issues with not. Like I said, I just can't say it enough that there's no cast off. To just put this into perspective for just the normal person out there that doesn't really know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you, you are going to see this with somebody getting viciously struck about the head. And I think that when Dr. Henry, when you have Henry Lee come in there, he's a hired gun. Dr. Michael Biden is kind of one of those types too, that for the world of forensic pathology, they're hired to give an opinion, and they're going to be used and they're going to get paid if they render an opinion that's favorable to that of the people that's paying them. And so, I've recently communicated with Henry Lee. I plan on talking to him further about this case later on, but he's giving a very plausible explanation as to what possibly accounts for a lot of this blood on the lower part of this wall. There's few things that kind of stand out to me in this case. Number one, they left that crime scene completely intact as far as all of the blood that is visible there for a long, long time. For months. Very easily. I don't even know how long they left it like that, but for a tremendous amount of time, which you would think, and I'm just throwing this out as a possibility. Like I said, I'm kind of on the fence here. Technically speaking, he could be guilty. I'm going to be devil's advocate just briefly.
Right.
If this guy did this, you would think one of the things that he would want to do the moment that crime scene cleared out of there is I could see a guilty person going, we need to get this cleaned up. We need to paint over this. I don't want to continually look at this thing. It's a constant reminder, et cetera, in an effort to get rid of any of that possible evidence for them to be able to look at later on. He didn't do that. He left it as is for the reasons I would guess that David Rudolph was probably like, hey, let's leave it as is and let's really, so we can examine this. And he did that. And I think that was interesting because you just don't see that very often on crime scenes. Most of those crime scenes are cleaned up and, well, look at Idaho. The whole house has been torn down. Yeah. So I don't know. That's one of the interesting things to me. When you talk about Dwayne Deaver, I think it's disgusting, and how this guy has got a job in the world of DNA today. I think I heard somewhere that he's working as like a supervisor in a private lab somewhere.
How's he not in jail?
I'm fascinated with that as to how he even got that job.
How's he not in jail? That's perjury.
I agree.
At a high level perjury in 34 cases. How's he not in jail? Man.
Well, that right there blows the credibility for a lot of this entire case. And it's just one of those things. If you're gonna operate, and he worked for, was it SLED? Not probably that SLED. That's South Carolina. What was it again? I'm sorry.
SBI. Is that what it was?
Yeah. Okay. So it's the North Carolina version of State Bureau of Investigation. Well, anyway. I whether he's guilty or not, with that guy's testimony, I think you have to, everything there is gone. As far as that, and I don't know. I think it's really disgusting that I watched that, And that was really, I didn't like him anyway, as far as his demeanor on the stand. I thought he was he's clear. He was doing things on the stand, that stuff that you just taught not to do. You know,
Right.
you really should treat the defense equally the same as you do the prosecution. And clearly he was partial when he was talking to one attorney to the next. And I thought he was disrespectful, and clearly, I don't know.
Yeah,
I just think that you have to start with the evidence.
I'm really glad you said that, because he did not speak matter of fact. He was most certainly speaking in a biased term, depending on who was speaking to him. 100%. You know,
clearly biased.
I have a question for Jason too about that. What amazed me is that this guy has testified over and over in courtrooms. Like, how in the world could he get up there and they enumerate on supposedly his level of expertise, how many cases he's done, all that? How could he do that over and over again and nobody go, wait a minute, we know this guy. He hasn't done that. Why did that go on so long before somebody picked up on it?
Because you're dealing with attorneys that are working with clients that don't have any money to pay them, and they're not spending their due diligence, in my opinion, to look into this guy's past.
Right.
And they're not asking these questions that David Rudolph ultimately did and researched to find out, okay, well, he's saying he's been on all these cases. Let's just look into that and see if he really has. And I think that I'm telling you right now, David Rudolph I saw him first on a trial with Ray Caruth, who was a football player. He was on Court TV many, many years ago, and he was representing Ray Caruth. And the guy he's just an incredibly talented attorney. And I think that he did the extra mile.
Well, there's a couple of parts here too. You know, keep in mind, you have a guy working for the state, and he's not the only corruption of the state so far that I've observed. You have the judge who, I'm starting to see this a lot more in a lot of judges. Once their decision's made, it's like God has spoken, and it can't be unspoken, you know? So there's a team against him, you know? Again, Michael Peterson had the cards stacked. He had the media Nancy Grace is just a gifted woman when it comes to convicting someone from her house. It's amazing. Like, let's put it this way. If I was innocent of something and they falsely arrested me and Nancy Grace decided to convict me via the media, I would be convicted, because none of those jurors walked in. I look at people's faces. None of them had the remote idea that this guy may or may have been innocent. He was convicted. And as far as Deaver, so I think Sandy can answer this. Sandy, that guy, in my opinion, looking at his face, narcissist, 100%. What are you thinking? I think you're mute, Sandy.
There you go.
Sorry. Repeat the question. Sorry, because I was so worried about trying to get to the mute button.
Gotcha. So Dwayne Deaver, the DNA analyst, the specialist that destroyed 34 cases and ruined the lives of many people, he's a narcissist, right? 100%, I think, by looking at just his behavior and his overall demeanor.
He is, but he's more than anything really an antisocial. So an antisocial is basically just anybody who's capable of doing whatever it takes, even if it means violating anybody else's rights, right? So if I want X, I will get X, even if it means I kill you, I do whatever. You know what I mean? So it's a complete disregard to social norms or anything like that. So for him, you know, yes, he has narcissistic. If I want my fame, and if it means, you know, it's at your cost, right?
Right.
And whether your freedom or whatever, he doesn't care. He doesn't care as long as he gets what he wanted. So it's a combination of both. Yeah,
100%. Because when it was unveiled that he was tampering with evidence, and just the way he was vaguely answering questions about it, and you know, and the attorney for Michael, like Jason said, that Rudolph guy is amazing. He does not leave shit unsaid. You know, one determining factor. So a local detective here in Florida, I was speaking to him. I'm like, how do you know to a certainty when you got the right guy, when he's guilty? What are some of the things for you that tell you this? And this question could go to Jason and Sandy. So in his opinion, he says, if I caught someone, I bring them to jail and they go to sleep immediately that night, because I feel like in his opinion, they're guilty, because they're not up freaking out like, oh, I'm going to jail, I'm innocent. The panic. It's like they're like, all right, well, I'm caught, going to bed. Jason, you share that opinion?
No, but I know where you're going with that. We see that a lot of times, and the reason why is because this individual has had a lot of weight on their shoulders, or at least that's what they talk about.
Right.
And it's kind of like they basically are exhausted by what they've had to endure up until that point, and then they basically just go to sleep.
Right.
You know, I've had people that I'm like, you know, I there was one guy in particular, I remember him going, he goes, hey, you don't mind if I just go ahead and put my feet up here? And I was like, really? You can go to sleep at a time like this? And he goes, what would you do? And I said, well, I would be freaking the F out right now is what I would be doing, considering I'm charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. So some people, I don't know. I've heard that many times. I hear it in the office. A lot of guys are like, oh, he's sleeping. There you go. It's the guy. Well, I need to have a little bit more of evidence than that. But just so I can – I don't want – listen, I've got this fear that – I do not want to arrest the wrong person. Okay. Right. I don't want to falsely convict somebody. And that's what you want. Okay. That is exactly what you want in a detective. I'm not interested in just throwing something together and because we have enough probable cause. Probable cause is only 51%. Okay. That you think this guy's guilty. It's not necessarily, sometimes we arrest people and it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes there's reasons that we arrest people when we do, and we're building on other things that we feel are going to prove this guy's guilt, right?
Right.
But I just don't see that in this particular case that they had enough to be able to, for me, and like I said, we've talked about this. We talk about this every time we do one of these things, is that every one of these, the documentary that we're watching is geared and leaning towards the defense.
Right, as a narrative.
And absolutely, in this case is that type of a documentary. So we're getting that. And so we're not getting everything that's probably in this particular case or whatever. And of course they make the prosecutors, and actually they did a good job on their own by making themselves look stupid. But the prosecutors in this case, you know, all of the stuff that they talked about with his bisexuality, and basically it was like, if you think that this is okay, this is just terrible stuff, and it's the devil and all this.
Yeah.
I thought it was crazy, especially the female. The female I wasn't a fan of at all. And even her partner looks somewhat disgusted with her at times. But, you know, I don't know. There's so much to unpackage on this particular deal. But if you take it step by step, in my opinion, you just broke this down, each thing. Leslie brought up the thing up in Germany. Is there any crime scene photos? No, there's not. So you have a lot of people that talked about there wasn't any blood. But then you have somebody else going, oh, there was blood everywhere. I was cleaning it for days. Yep. Well, which one is it really here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then furthermore, there was a spot on 60 Minutes out of Australia that was talking to the family about this. And and this is what they're saying, but that they didn't do a complete autopsy, where they didn't even examine the brain from the first person, even when they did the exhumation. If that's true, I can't say how you cannot. The forensic pathologist that's on this case, she's super well known. I mean, I knew who she was. She's been in the business forever, and she's got a tremendous reputation as far as being very, very capable, etc. So I don't know, but when you take certain things of this and you take piece by piece, the thing in Germany, I really didn't put a lot of credit into that, because really, do we really know? There is no crime scene photos. So that to me, I really didn't think much about that.
Yeah, other than the circumstances surrounding it, because
it's suspicious, yes. Yeah, but she did have a condition that could have very easily led to her death.
Yeah, she did have an ailment, a pre-existing ailment. And at the end of the day, the only thing that's suspicious of it is it happens to be the stair. It's like, Jason, you have a guy in your holding room. You're going to question him. Somebody was murdered with a toaster, and this guy's here, and then 20 years prior, he's in another state, and you find out, well, someone else there was killed, and guess what? It was with a toaster, but it wasn't this guy. He was just, it just happens to be that he was in that area in another state. You know what I mean? It becomes bizarre. And you know
it does. And listen, I've had a case. I had a case that there was a young lady, just to kind of give you an idea of this. I had a young lady that was her mother had committed suicide, and years ago, I 7 years ago, probably, or longer, when her mother had committed suicide. And now this girl's just coming forward to ask questions, which I was a little bit disappointed, would be a good word,
Right.
that she didn't come forth a lot earlier. And one of the things that she had brought up is the fact that this guy that was with her mother, his previous girlfriend or wife had died of suicide. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, I'd actually looked into that. And when I looked at and I had to sit down and talk with her, and I had to explain to her, well, let me tell you what I found in the first one. And it was a hanging, which are extremely difficult and unusual to stage. And then the second thing was the reasons that I came to the conclusion about the mother, dying because of suicide. And like I told her, is I said, listen, this guy didn't kill her, but he may be the reason why she's dead. I mean, because maybe he drove both of these women to the point of suicide because he made them so miserable, literally. Right. But you know, just kind of, I'm just trying to throw out an idea that just because somebody else died in somebody else's life previous to this I'm not going to be all in. Yeah, I mean, I have to have evidence to support that.
The guy might be a mush, man. He might just be bad luck. It's not, you know, it's look like it's. I'm not going to say his name, but it's someone I know who joins many teams with the hopes of winning to go to Vegas. The teams always lose, and at some point you have to kind of do the rule out factor. Like maybe you're just bad luck, man. You know. The other thing too, this is when I'm done with this, I'm going to have Sandy form an opinion on this one because this guy, the prosecution calls this guy. They wanted to damage Michael. His name was Brent. What is it? Volgermont. He was a
the escort.
Yeah, that hurt. In my opinion, I spoke with Leslie about this over the phone. That guy damaged the prosecution. He really hurt them. He was so charismatic, and the best part is when they're like, well, you have many clients? He goes, yeah, sure. Judges, cops, lawyers, doctors. I was like, holy, that was the worst thing they could have done, is to call someone up to destroy the character of Michael. And when you watched it, if you ever rewatched the clips, you could see the jury's enjoying him. You know, like the whole bias of whatever it is he did or didn't do, he was so engaging, and I think it damaged him. But his behavior, he was former military. Sandy, that you know what? The witness, Brent. Yeah. What did you make of that guy?
I mean, he did appear, you know, very charismatic. You know, is he really? I don't know. But I agree. I think it definitely hurt the prosecution. He seemed genuine, but again, you know, we're looking at something that we've already discussed. That's really, you know, from the point of view that's going to benefit, you know, the defendant. You know, right. But yeah, I mean, I think he seemed to be pretty straightforward about it and didn't really care. You know what I mean? He's not the one in hiding, right? So he's just like, look, this is what I do. This is who I am. You know, yes, this occurred, you know, and so he was able to kind of quickly say things. So I don't think he was trying to sit there and fabricate or come up with things,
right?
You know?
Yeah. I mean, he said several times, he's like, yeah, I've been visited by men who are happily married. So they were trying to utilize the idea that he's in this bad marriage, he's not happy. But when he said that, because yeah, men that are happily married, they get curious, and I'm not saying they're consistent. Some are, some aren't. And when he said cops, judges, doctor, I was dying. I was like, this guy just really hurt the prosecution horribly. At that point, and to Jason's credit, the lack of evidence, in my opinion, I agree. And then that guy's testimony, I thought they had no shot at convicting this guy. None. I later find out that it was the sister of the deceased that was applying tremendous pressure, reaching out to every media platform she could. Relentless. But yeah, so, I mean, in your opinion, was it a defense mechanism, his behavior on the stand, or is that you just think is his personality?
I think he probably lives his, I mean, if you think about it, he does this for a living. He's an escort, so you're gonna put on the charm. I mean, I just think it's like in him, already ingrained in him, that's who he is. You know what I mean? So I think, he just came like, this is my persona. You know what I mean? This is my job, this is my work. So what you're probably seeing is not necessarily the real him, like off stage, but this is who he is as far as work, because they're asking him about basically this is what he does as a profession.
Right. I mean,
so he is in that professional mode. And I really do think that is him. You know what I mean? Right. You want people to like you. If not, then you don't get repeats. You know what I mean? Like,
good point.
It kind of hurts your bottom line if you're not a likable type of guy, you know what I mean? And charismatic and, and he fits that really well.
I agree. He came off very genuine. I know Leslie's chomping at the bit to form an opinion on that one, right, Les? What's your thoughts, Leslie?
I'm not sure I saw it the same way you did. I still think that there were a lot of people that were on the jury that they weren't embracing this guy or thinking better of Michael Peterson because of that. Maybe it satisfied a little bit of curiosity in some of the jurors, and a little salacious talk and all that about what went on. But, still, the women especially, I think, were thinking, well, my husband, if I found that with him, how would I react to that? And thought it might be a motive, just how it would unravel their marriage. So I'm not so sure it was as damaging as you think. It's hard to say. And I think when you're making a decision, I mean, who am I to say? I'm just a true crime author and with some law enforcement experience, not like Jason, who's, he walks the walk all the time. But, it just seems like you take these little bits.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Just for the listener, I'm not claiming to be an expert at anything.
No, I didn't say you were an expert, but you do this all the time. So, I'm speaking just from more of a outsider's opinion. But
I appreciate it.
All these little, if you consider them little concerns that pop up, like a previous person in your life that you knew well, that you were the last to see, that happened to fall down the stairs. Yeah, I guess it's really not, it's not something that's going to put you away, but I think it weighs sort of heavy on, if I'm looking at what makes him suspicious and why we think that maybe this guy fits the bill. It just seems, I had talked with Adam before, it just seems very odd to me that he was definitely the last one to have seen her. And it was supposedly, I don't know where I read it or if it was in the documentary, he was the one that told the people that arrived on the scene that, because I don't think they found her till the next day, but the girl in Germany. But he was the one that told them, oh, she's got this condition, and it was probably that. And they sort of, I don't know how much they just believed him and thought, I don't know what they do if they considered that really a suspicious death or not. But just I'm not saying that's something to put him away and put him on death row, but it's, to me, if I'm looking at him as a suspect, that makes me take definitely a second, third look at who he is and what he's capable of.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine from the pool hall, I told him I was looking into this case, and he knows nothing about it. He doesn't watch really any of his documentaries and stuff, but I kind of gave him the some of the bullet points, and he looked at me and says, either this guy's killing people in a way that is hard to detect, or he should just buy a single level home, because it's clearly the luck. It brings us back to the luck factor. It's scary. So Jason, so this guy gets to stand, right? He is a call guy. In my opinion, very charismatic. I paid attention to people in the background. I even watched people giggle, like on the jury and around the courtroom. What do you think, in your opinion, happened with his testimony?
Well, I think that I do think that it was somewhat damaging to the state. I think that I would believe, they have television cameras throughout this courtroom while this thing's going on, and they're clearly seen. And while he's up on the stand, I'm sure to some extent, and I think you saw this a little bit in the OJ case, where people are kind of, they're almost, it's their opportunity. And so maybe he was a little bit more, I don't know. He seemed to be truthful. I didn't, he's not like he's part of this plot to kill somebody. And really, I really didn't think a whole heck of a lot about it, honestly. He confirmed one thing to me, and that is that there was at least there was plans to have a relationship with one another. And that's the part that they found. So that's kind of with that guy. I mean, whether he did or not, I mean, clearly he's admitted to the fact that he's had inappropriate discussions with these people and probably interactions with at least one person. So that was clearly put out there. And I know that in that 60 Minutes episode, he at least made the claim that wouldn't even be brought up in a courtroom today, that would end up being a mistrial if that happened to be brought up. And right. I don't know if that's the case or not. I've never had a case that was like this. But I do think that it's, I sit there and have to question, all right, is it relevant? Is that a relevant piece of information? It could be. I mean, it really could be. Did he get caught in some kind of illicit love affair that his wife ends up finding out about? She's furious. Not only are they in financial ruins, so to speak, right. And then maybe she's just had enough, and then that's it. And then he ends up losing his cool. But there's things about him that I would like to know, and they really didn't touch much on this. The clothes that he's wearing at the time of this incident, I would be interested to know what that looked like under a microscope. And what I mean by that is maybe they could examine that to see what type of blood stains are on the shirt. Does it show microparticulates that may have been somewhat of like a cast off or a blowback, almost like what you would see? I know we didn't have a firearm, but we would look for that on a firearm injury where you have a blowback, coming back at you, where you're seeing small microparticulates of blood. And in this case, if you're violently striking somebody, you may have some of those that are really, really small. They're like 1 millimeter or less. And you may see those, and you can distinguish between some of those possibly under a microscope to see whether or not the blood is smears from having contact and rubbing against that person, or if there's areas where it showed that maybe there were some impact spatters on his clothing. That's what I would want to know. And I would be interested to know if they even considered that in looking at the clothing that he was wearing. That's pretty big. And then also I would like to see what he looks like photographed from head to toe, just to see if he had any of those microparticulates on his person. I mean, listen, if he is doing what he's alleged to have done and he's striking somebody violently, you're going to have some of that cast off. Okay, let's say hypothetically speaking, we don't have it on the ceiling for some crazy reason, okay? But that doesn't mean that you may not have some of that on his person, right? On his shoes or on his pants, his shorts. I know that they found some blood or something like that on his shorts, I think, if I remember correctly, and things like that, which I think you're going to expect some of that. He's touching her and he's trying to help her. At least that's what he's saying. So you're going to see some of that. But I'm not looking for just the blood stains from contact. I'm looking the microparticulates, stuff residuals that maybe he's not even able to see with his eyes, but yet you will be able to see that in a microscopic examination. Right. And I think that would have been interesting to find out what that showed.
Now, I mean, to add to what you're saying, I agree with you 100%, because if what I think in my theory that, you know, they got a heated argument he pushes her down the stairs. He goes down there to finish her off by, you know, grabbing her by the head, slamming her head into the step. You would definitely want to look at him under a microscope to look for those small cast-offs, because it would not make the ceiling. It would not make the walls. It would make his person. I think I agree with you 100% on that. That's just, you know, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that's my theory.
And heads bleed a ton anyway. Cut the top of your head and let me know what that looks like.
No, I cut myself shaving.
They bleed
I bleed for
a mother load.
Yeah. You cut yourself shaving. If you don't take care of it, bleed forever, you know?
Well, and if she'd been drinking too, I mean, her blood may even be thinner. I don't remember what her blood alcohol level was. I don't remember that, but I'd be interested to know what that is. And what I'm talking about, Adam, is if the panel kind of agrees with me or not, you just got to take everything step by step.
Right.
Look at her. Look at the clothing. Look at this. Look at what we have and what we don't have and what's missing. Does it make sense? These crime scenes generally make sense. They really do. And in this particular case, I think that it's kind of a confusion to a lot of the people, even experts that are looking at this thing. And then I guess I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring up the owl feathers that they found later on that, you know, to tell you the truth, I mean, I guess there's been a number of attacks from owls and I'd like to know. I mean, that wasn't brought up early on. Why? Because they didn't know that those feathers were even there. Okay. So why were they there? How did they get there? And is that even plausible as a possibility? Well, if this has happened in other places, I sat there and I thought about this. I thought, could it possibly be that an owl was up in that stairwell just because it's dark and all of a sudden flew in there somehow and just sat there and got startled? But then you think about the blood that's outside. And they were talking about how she might have been taking some Christmas thing out there and might have got attacked. And is it possible? I don't know. You look at the injuries and you look at I've never seen one of these, but you look at the injuries and there's some of those injuries look like it's possible. And how do you explain those owl feathers being there?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And, you know, and when I think about that, those are things that I think now, for me, I mean, the guy might be a liar. He might be deplorable. He may be having a secret sex life, and he may be looking at gay porn on the internet, whatever, you know?
Right.
There's a lot of people looking at stuff on the internet probably. And I just, those are just the things that I'm trying to at least consider.
I'm in my mind, in my imagination.
He could be guilty.
Yeah.
I'm considering these.
I'm in my imagination picturing this guy at a diner sliding an envelope of money to an owl.
Well, you know where that comes from? That comes from his neighbor that lives like 2 or 3 houses down.
Yeah.
That was an attorney. Somebody that he's like, listen, these things are all around here and they have been known to attack. And I saw the guy when he did that interview, he seemed to be he didn't seem like some crazy guy. He seemed like he was genuinely trying to he just thought it was ludicrous, that the reasoning, and this does make sense. And if you think about it, and you really do think about it, it does kind of make sense if owls do this regularly. I just don't know what the habits are of owls, but it's possible. And the injuries do look like it's possible too, to me, actually. Go ahead.
So I actually researched that whole entire theory. And so there have been attacks of owls in our country. I think maybe 13 a year. 0 deaths. No one's ever died of an owl attack. And most of the owl attacks occur in the spring.
Okay.
Right.
And so there's a lot of inconsistencies. So when you were talking about the facts, for me, that no one's mentioned, and for me, it bleeds, it screams to me like there's something wrong with this, is his entire 911 call.
Yeah, I would agree.
So if you look at the time of events, it's 2:40 in the morning, and he says that she had gone in hours before and that she had to get ready for a meeting. So that means she was still up, and he made it seem and mind you, this is Raleigh, December 9th, cold, and you're going to hang out by the pool. And I looked up the average low for Raleigh that year was 32 degrees. I am not hanging out at no pool at 3 o'clock in the morning in shorts, okay? Like, I mean, it gets damp. Like, how much are you really going to hang out there and tolerate? So for me, and then the thing is with the owl thing, the front door was closed.
Yeah.
So if I'm hurt, let me just tell you, I'm screaming and I'm going to the first person I think of that can help me, which would be my husband. I'm not going to go upstairs or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, because there's blood outside, so saying that if the attack occurred outside, right, and then she came inside, but would you go upstairs? No, I probably would have gone immediately to the person who could help me, which would have been the only person in the house, my husband.
Yeah.
And he's out back in the pool freezing himself because it's 32 degrees out.
Yeah, I don't buy that whole thing either.
And no, and then the thing is, he calls and listen, at an entire scene, if I stumbled across a scene like that, I wouldn't say, hey, my wife fell down the stairs. I would be like, listen, there's blood. I don't know what happened. Because for me, the amount of blood would have stood out in my head. I've been like, oh my gosh, she's bleeding. I don't know what to do. He never mentions that she was bleeding in any of the 2 911 calls he made. So for me, there's like, for me, his call and the beginning of the entire thing has so many issues. And even when he was talking about like what they did that night, when he's talking, he goes, well, we usually do this. And then he'll flip to, well, we did this. So he kind of fluctuated back and forth from the usual. That means, did you really do that? Probably not. He's just throwing it out there like, oh, we usually have a couple of drinks.
No, that's
I think
a good
her blood
point.
alcohol, right, usually. Which doesn't mean that
point.
that's what, right. So when you're talking to somebody, they'll say, we did this, we did that, you know what I mean? Because they're replaying it in their mind. They'll give it play by play. They won't say, well, we usually did this. Well, and he always like added a little bit more extra details that I really felt was necessary. Like, oh, and actually we left, what is it? The dinner plates on the table.
Right.
We didn't pick them up. Let me just tell you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to really focus on that if I'm giving you a play by play. Like, we walked over here, we did this, but he would fluctuate back and forth. We usually, and he said, we usually go down to the pool.
But definitely not that time of year, and definitely not when it's not that cold.
Yeah, for 3 hours or whatever it was that he was out there at 32 degrees.
Yeah, I live in
shorts.
I live in Florida.
Drinking 2 bottles of wine.
By the way,
He said they had 2 bottles of wine.
Yes, exactly. He threw that out there, but her blood alcohol was, I think, they found it at 0.07, which means pretty much 1 drink.
Right. And if you looked at the glasses of wine, if you watched it, so I have the uncensored video of the crime scene. If you look when they're first initially walking through, there's 2 glasses of wine, and I got to tell you, it seems staged. It seems to me like he's putting it there with the intention, oh, hey, look, she's been drinking all night. Bizarre. And I'll tell you, I'm watching it now. Actually, it's funny. There are a lot of owl attacks I didn't know about, and they're brutal. Like, there's this kid, I'm thinking this video is from, says here, mostly in the coastal areas. This kid got clawed by an owl. Clawed by an owl in the middle of a video that they were making with friends in some woods. That scares me. So now I have a new... Yeah, I live in Florida. Everything here wants to kill you anyway. You know what I mean? So I try to stay out of the woods. Yeah, the drinking, the hanging out by the pool, the conditions of the time of year. I don't know. It puts me in a weird position. And you guys have done enough of these with me to know that. I usually want to find people innocent. I want to hear that there's corruption, that they're going to be okay, and I don't think that's the case here. I'm not saying this guy's like I said, he's not a serial murderer. But there's some circumstances that give me a really long pause. The killer too, man, it's just so hard to say. It's really hard to say because you have this guy, Dwayne, who put someone in prison for 17 years. He falsified reports in 34 cases. And then you see, Nancy Grace, the cards are stacked against Michael. It's chaos. So I think here's what I'm going to ask. I've been waiting to ask Jason this. Jason, you get to a crime scene. The husband's alleging that someone broke in the house and killed his wife while he was, I don't know, in the living room, didn't even know what happened. What measures do you take when you hear that?
Well, I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to look at this area and I'm going to, that really sounded ridiculous. That sounds ridiculous to me. So, but what we would do is we would look to see if there's any signs of defense wounds where she's got broken nails and things along that nature, and probably swab her hands and see if there's any DNA that later on you're not going to get that right away. And then you're going to look for forced entry, or where would this entry point be, the point where the individual would have left from. Is there any evidence at all to support the theory that there was somebody else that had been there? Footprints, anything. If they're, to hit somebody 7 times over the head, that takes a lot of effort. So what kind of, I mean, that's what I would be looking at, honestly. And that's what I would be considering. I think that the good doctor brings up some great points about some of the things in his interview that she's absolutely right. It's almost his word selection is interesting, as far as usually this or sometimes this or whatever, as opposed to this is what we did and this is what we didn't do. And she is bringing up something that's kind of almost like it's something that they teach in the read technique, actually, is things that you may look for as things that might show signs of deception. When you ask somebody a flat out question and then they're saying things like, well, we usually do this. So you're bringing up a really good point there. And, I'm still not guilty, but I'm absolutely not an absolute not guilty either. This is why this case is so popular with all of the armchair quarterbacks that exist out there. That's why the Netflix series was, through the roof as far as ratings. That's why HBO has just recently put out a series on this as well, because, and even with all of the experts that are located out in the world, they can't tell you what happened. They just can't tell you with 100% certainty what happened in this particular situation. It's just not, it's an unusual crime scene. It really is, even with all that blood being at the base. And I think Henry Lee kind of articulates it in an interesting way, as far as how that it could be her coughing blood and how you'd have that fine mist and stuff up against the walls. So, by the way, Leslie, thanks. Yes. I got Leslie sent me her book, and I want to thank you for that. And I'm gonna be reading through that, and it showed up yesterday, so thank you. But like I said, I don't know. That's what I would be doing. I just still think that we, as investigators and as detectives, we need to do our due diligence, and if the resources are available to do whatever you can do on these cases, I think that you really have to do that. And you need to, I like how we're discussing it, because this is exactly what we like to do. We're going to give just a behind the scenes secret. As detectives, we do a lot of this discussing cases. And this is, Sandra brings up great points. Leslie's brought up some points that are good points. You have as well, Adam. And I think that these are the things that as detectives, you should be discussing it. And as opposed to going, nope, it's this and it's no other way, and da-da-da-da-da. That's just not the way to handle it.
Right.
This is a complicated case. It really is complicated. Do you have to have motive? No, you don't have motive. Motive is not necessary for murder. But a $1.5 million is a heck of a lot of reason why somebody that's suffering or having some issues. And it's not like he had a steady stream of income coming in.
Well, no, she was the breadwinner. He had really basically no income in comparison.
She was, but the one thing that I want to remember one thing, and that was they had something on the verge of really kind of going to a movie, the movie rights and stuff. They had stuff that was, to me, it sounded like they were on the verge of something that was going to be maybe some serious money. And I don't know if that was from something that I think it was something he had written or something along those lines. So is somebody willing to it's kind of, when you think of making of a murderer, is somebody willing to completely throw everything away when they're on the verge of some kind of a real success somewhere? I don't know. I really don't know. It's kind of an interesting case.
Well, it's
And-
bizarre because you have celebrities. Lane Stanley. Well, no, I'm not going to use Lane from Alice Chains. It's Chris Cordell, the chat from Lincoln. These are people of tremendous success. They commit suicide. It's crazy. So the psychology of people is a dangerous game when guessing. Personal. So I said to you earlier about the guy who's downstairs in his living room. His wife's upstairs in her bedroom. She's killed. He wakes up off the couch, finds her dead. And the one thing that stood out to me is that even with they're alleging the idea that, or he's alleging, someone came into the house through the upstairs balcony, killed my wife. He's got her blood marks. He went to check on her, but the first thing they did is they photographed him, his hands, his shirts. They documented everything on his person. Just in clearly, the wife's dead. Let's look at the husband first, and we'll still investigate. But it's a good idea to look at the husband. And what you said earlier about Michael's belongings, it's not very well documented. In fact, now that you mention that, in all the stuff I researched, I don't see a tremendous amount of photographs of his personal belongings at all from that night. It's bizarre. That's a really bizarre thing to think about. I mean, let's summarize in this way. I'll start with Sandy in this case. Sandy, for you, and everything you've watched, heard, spoke, or listened to, what do you feel about Michael? Innocent, guilty? What do you think personally?
So I'm going to have a really obscure, probably take on all this.
Sure.
So do I think he is truly guilty? No. Do I think he is an accomplice? Yes. So, the blood outside, I don't know if you guys I saw some videos of his son. I think he kind of lost it there for a little while, but he was even saying that his dad was a murderer and that he had killed Kathleen and everything. And he just unraveled. I mean, he really came apart, and then he kind of gets it back together and he goes, no, my dad never did that.
Right.
So I almost wonder if perhaps the son, because the first one that arrived on the scene was the son very, very quickly. Maybe he was the one who actually killed Kathleen.
Right.
And dad covered. There's blood outside. So how do you know it wasn't him? I think a lot of those staged. So, could have been the son, and then he decides to cover up for his son. I can see him doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you.
I can easily see him doing that. Could have been him after he gets discovered that he had this,
Yeah, I mean,
other life.
Sometimes plain sight. Sometimes the killer's in plain sight. If you listen to the episode I did with Norm Pardo regarding O.J. Simpson, O.J. Simpson was a high-profile case. Extremely high, but never. And there's some facts here that people don't know. Is that this guy, Glenn Rogers, was hanging around O.J. He's a serial killer who was hanging around O.J. and his wife and other people. There's photos with them together. And he was under the name of a man he murdered. He stole a murdered man's identification and used his name in L.A. And that's still not spoken about. In fact, I'm doing another episode with Norm to confront that a little more. So could it be the son? Sure. And the father cover up? He loves his children. There's no doubt in that. Sure.
Yeah. And the thing is, the son kind of unravels and then kind of goes back and forth. So it's weird. At moment, like I said, he's saying that his father did it. His father killed both, actually. One of his videos, he just completely goes unhinged. He's like walking around in the parking lot. I don't know if any of you guys saw that. He's just kind of going off on these tangents about how his dad murdered Kathleen and the woman in Germany.
Yeah, I was actually going to touch that as we were closing. Yeah, I did see that. I did read about it. He was saying his father. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
and and it's weird because he was completely supportive of his father going through the trial, going through all this, and then all of a sudden that's a complete 180 shift. So maybe
if you
the thing is like Um,
Well, if you read
whole-
about it, he was reluctant to take part. The son was reluctant at first to take part of the documentary. He was reluctant even more so for the second bout of court when they discovered this other guy was falsifying reports and mishandling DNA. The son was reluctant to be involved in that second round. So yeah, there's some bizarre behavior from him, and sure,
right, exactly. So there's some inconsistencies with the son. So,
so
there is a lot of discrepancies, and like the whole owl feather thing. How did it get there? I'm like, maybe whatever was used could potentially been some sort of tool that was outside, and therefore it had feathers.
Well, when we speak in terms of feathers, Jason, how many feathers were found? Do you know? Was it a large amount?
Oh, I don't remember the exact amount. I think it was more microscopic kind of a deal.
Okay.
Where, yeah, they saw evidence of it. They show a picture of it they show like a microscopic shot of one of the feathers, so we're talking very, very small.
Minuscule, yeah.
And but I do think it was like in her hands though, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe I don't remember exactly. That's something that I guess I should really know. But and then again, I mean, you probably have owl feathers all around that property,
right?
Really.
Yeah.
So if you happen to sit on one of the seats outside, I mean, I guess there's a possibility you could have one.
Yeah, I mean, there could have been a nest above them in the trees that was shedding. There could be a lot of variables there.
I do think that it's interesting though, and it's something that had came up. And when you look at the injuries of her scalp. And I mean, one of the areas on that scalp, it almost does look like one of the talons of how it would be separated like this and to scratch down. So I think that's something. It's interesting. It's very, very interesting. And unfortunately, Dwayne Deaver kind of killed it for me. I just and not killed it for me, but it really, really puts it really is disappointing because what that does is that just ruins the trust from the community towards the police. And it takes us years to get beyond that. Mm-hmm. And they had that happen here in Oklahoma City with a lady by the name of, her last name was Gilchrist. And I still remember it. I wasn't even a cop when she was in Oklahoma City, and she lied on testimony with many, many cases. And planted evidence and everything else. She was a forensic lady, and it's just horrible. And why that happens, I think, I don't know, because I don't think that way. So I really can't tell you how that. I guess they want to be the superstar that brings it all home. And in his case, I think that's probably what goes on here, Sandra. Right? Is that this guy wants to be the hero, the only one that can see the truth, and he's the one that uncovered it. And his exhibits looked pretty cool, but they were really a lot of work put into those. But his experiments looked really stupid.
Yeah, I mean,
and just ridiculous.
I was going to ask you about that. When you watch those experiments and the way he was trying to find the right cast, I mean, I don't know a lot about forensics, and I thought of you the whole time. Like, I wonder what Jason would think of this, because I think it's horseshit.
Well, it looked like it to me. I've never seen one of our forensic scientists out in the parking lot doing all these various things and trying to recreate that stuff. I would love to see that, actually. But if it was legit,
right.
And obviously he's like, well, yeah, I wasn't getting what we were looking for, but this is why he did it. And it just didn't look good at all.
Yeah. And the worst part is where they got some sort of kind of similar spatter and they high-fived. That's the lack of professionalism there bugged me. You're high-fiving,
yeah,
someone's dead. You know what I mean? Someone's life has been terminated, and you're high-fiving because you got one out of many hundreds of tries to prosecute someone. You would think that they would be more determined to find out the truth behind it. Who did this?
Well, and we didn't really touch upon this, but this is worth mentioning as well. When their whole theory was, it's the blowpoke, it's nothing else, it has to be the blowpoke.
Right.
And then when they find it, I mean, I'm really a little bit surprised that I figured that would have a pretty damning effect as far as the overall outcome in this case. And they just kind of set it aside and said, well, it must have been something else.
Right.
Even though the whole trial relied upon that evidence, which they did find. And it didn't look to me like they had been planted there after the fact. That's ridiculous. Furthermore, that blowpoke is so flimsy that that thing would have been beat to all get out. It would have been bent up like crazy. So there's no way that was used.
Yeah, I mean, they're hollow. Yeah, that's a good point. They're hollow. They break pretty easily. I mean, I remember when I was in New York, my grandmother had one by her fireplace. I broke that with ease. I mean, super.
But think about it. Think about this. 7 strikes to the head or 7 lacerations, and there's no skull fractures.
Well,
none.
Even
and
more so, there was no material from that item in her skin, skull, hair, nothing.
No.
That's not cast iron. That's not steel. It's like a really tough aluminum. It's hollow. It's exactly what it is. It's a blow poke.
And we know that that's not even used. So it's got to be something else.
Right.
It's got to be something else. So what kind of evidence of anything? Was it something that had been painted? Did they find microscopic paint particles? Well, no, because you would have heard about that.
Right.
And did they find metal shavings potentially or something? Grease, anything that could have potentially been on a tool? And the answer is no.
Right.
Did they find any splinters from wood? No. So all of those things, that's what makes this case fascinating, because it's if it was a crime, then it's the perfect crime.
It really, really. The circumstances, all of it. Leslie, what's your summary?
Maybe not the perfect crime, because he ended up spending 8 years in prison, something like that. So
yeah, and still harassed to this day.
Yeah.
Leslie, what's your summary? What do you think? Guilty, not guilty? What are your thoughts?
Well, it wasn't Todd, the son, and I feel bad for the son as far as how I saw him depicted. Was he was always trying to get his dad's approval, and it was always about Clayton. At least that was, the story that they were
spinning,
So I don't think it was Todd. I don't think he had a reason, but that's just from the information I had. I think that Michael Peterson had a reason. I think that it's interesting. We don't think him engaging with escort service has really a lot of value, and yet it was Amber Fry who sunk Scott Peterson's case when it was discovered he'd had an affair with her. So I think those liaisons outside of marriage, when it's a marriage partner that is murdered, are important to consider. So I think he was after the insurance money. I think he wanted to live life the way that he wanted to live life. And when she found out about it and didn't like it, then that's what he resorted to. And I think he's guilty.
Okay. I mean, to support what you're saying, if you watch that whole docuseries, whether it be home or the courtroom, nothing he was wearing was cheap. I'll say that much. I mean, this guy was wearing top of the line clothing through the whole thing. And I know that doesn't want to sound like it's a factor, but human beings, most times when they find here's an example. I've had a discussion with friends in who would do well in the post-apocalypse. I think you would find rich people becoming murderers because they're not going to part with their stuff. People at the very lowest level of society, they're just used to it. You know what I mean? It's the middle class people that are going to struggle the most because they bound by law and belief systems. I don't want to go to hell for murder. I don't want to go to. It's the rich people that will kill you fast. They're not going to lose possessions. They're not. They're going to snap. And like I said, the lower level people, they've been there. They're going to survive well. So for this guy, which I'll summarize my belief system thereafter, there's a lot of suspicious shit surrounding this guy, 100%. So that being said, we're going to move to Jason. Jason, what do you think? Guilty, not guilty? And,
I just don't know. I really just don't know at the end of the day. I want to, you guys are bringing up some really exceptional points, and it kind of makes me want to lead to the guilty. I mean, that money, it is a lot of money.
Right.
But I would be one of those that'd be sitting in a jury room. And for me to say this right now, believe me, this is unusual. Okay.
Right.
Most of these people, it's pretty telling to me. I would have to hear more. I really would. I don't know that I would have enough to be able to send this guy off without being 100% sure. And that's just me in reference to this.
Agreed. So for me, in summary, and you've heard my theory, my theory about how she died and what he potentially did, let's remove that, because I can't take it to court. From everything that's going on in this case, I personally don't like the guy. He reads sinister to me. Like, this guy, 100%, in my opinion, just my opinion, he definitely has a few personalities he hangs out with upstairs, if you know what I mean. And the money factor, I think the way he likes living life, the type of life he lives, when you read about the food he eats and consumes, the drinks he prefers, the way he interacts with his children, 100% it's a facade. And he likes the facade. He's not willing to let it go. Mm-hmm. But if I'm in a jury, let's talk about the initial case. I agree with Jason. I don't hear a lot here telling me, or a lot of evidence pointing this guy is guilty. I just don't. Now, if I'm on a jury of the next group that comes out, I learn about this other guy who's been defrauding people, and people are going to prison, and he's tampering with evidence. That even more so sets this guy free. Despite my personal feelings or beliefs about Michael Peterson, based on everything I heard, I can't convict this guy after that. There's corruption. That's not clean. That's not justice. And especially with Nancy Grace harping in the media. Good God. How is she allowed to do that? I don't know. I mean, you would think this is a fair and just society where you could go to court and get a real day in court and not have everyone there with a pre-thought about what it is that you're guilty or not guilty of. So, yeah, if I'm a juror, I don't have enough to put him in prison. But as a person and what I observed and what I think he's guilty. I think he's guilty somehow. It's written on him. He's got deception on his face. His behavior speaks deception. The facade he wears, his overall behavior. I just, Scott Peterson, let's use the other Peterson. I don't think he's guilty. I think there's a lot of circumstances, even more so that's coming to light now, that's going to support his claim of not guilt. I
don't know. Project Innocence has picked it up, so
I heard.
I don't know what the story is behind that, but I'm sure we'll hear something within the near future.
There's some things I know. In fact, we're going to revisit that as a team. I'll tell you what. We'll talk about it post podcast, because it's really interesting that some opinions that we shared on our episode are now some factors that are causing this guy to be looked at again. I think that's interesting. So yeah, overall, I think he's guilty, but I just can't put him in prison because I don't have evidence. So that being said, I
agree with you, Adam.
Yeah,
that he's guilty, but there's not enough evidence. For me, he's a really good liar, and for me, if he lies a lot, I can tell you that much. Yeah. And so for me, if you're that much of a liar, there's somewhere behind all that is guilt,
right?
But no evidence to convict.
Especially, again, it's a really bizarre thing that this woman, you're not even married to this woman, and which makes me think that there was an affair. Mm-hmm. At the point of her death, her husband's already dead 2 years from a heart attack. And then there is more than one witness seeing him leave the home on the evening that she was found dead. And to support what Jason said, no photographs. They took hand notes on a crime scene murder. Hand notes. Well, I'm glad I don't live in Germany. You know what I mean? That's crazy. Hand notes. No photographs or at least if there were, they don't exist today. And the damage to that woman's head, similar to the damage of Kathleen's, not identical, but similar. Did she have some pre-existing factors in her health? Sure. So did Kathleen. I don't know. It's not the perfect crime, but it seems like a well thought out one, in my opinion. You know what I mean? I don't believe that he beat her in the head with an object. I firmly believe in both cases, they go down the stairs. He just goes down there and just finishes the job by slamming her head into the back of the thing. Looks like they fell on the stairs. And how are you going to prove otherwise? Mm-hmm. It puts law enforcement in a bad position. I'm not excusing the behavior of the team that investigated this, because that's horseshit. Tampering with evidence is horseshit. You shouldn't do it. If you can't get, like Jason said, he wants to go to bed at night knowing that he did his job and he got a conviction on good merit and good work. And that's the way it should be, period. So that being said, we're going to go into a post podcast. Is there anything anybody wants to add? Nope. Good.
That pretty much covered it.
All right. For those of you who are listening, we're going to say good day, good evening, good night, or whatever it is for you. And I'm going to talk to the team in post.
All right.